Each year, the festival is dedicated to a Vermont figure who has made a significant contribution in the area of literature or literacy. Organizers are extremely pleased to dedicate the 2014 Burlington Book Festival to an internationally venerated artist in recognition of her groundbreaking contributions, of course, to both literature and literacy. We feel honored to have a writer of her stature as a neighbor and are very proud to dedicate the 10th annual festival to Katherine Paterson. Yeah, I'm going to continue, but I think that's why a lot of people are here tonight. And she and the Leahys, of course, there are a number of people here among the most special people to interview. I've been so honored to interview many of you here tonight, but particularly special to me. To offer a few words of tribute is someone who knows a little bit of something about writing for young people herself, and is a great friend of the festival, who, believe it or not, will publish her 100th book this fall. It's true, look it up. We're very grateful to her for helping us pay tribute to Katherine Paterson. Please welcome Tanya Lee Stone.
Now, I was told that Katherine was going to be sitting here while I was speaking, and I'm actually quite happy that you're sitting there, so I don't have to look over my shoulder to see your beautiful face. I first met Katherine Paterson, as many people have, through her books. I was 12. I had climbed up the ladder to my reading loft, an L-shaped nook my father built in a corner of the ceiling of our music room, just big enough to hold one tomboy, a lamp, and a healthy assortment of books. It was a Sunday afternoon, and the book on deck was Bridge to Terabithia. The tug of the beach where I grew up, just steps from my door, was no match for staying inside that day, because I wasn't inside, tucked up in my nook. I was on the bus with Janice Avery. I was at the art museum with Miss Edmonds, and I was in the forest with Jess and Leslie. I remember trying to pace myself, trying to slow myself down from tearing through the book too quickly so that it wouldn't fly by too fast. And then in stark contrast, resisting the urge to hurry up through the heartbreak. And it was heartbreak. I could barely catch my breath. Long after I turned the last page, I stayed up in my loft recovering. I can still feel the cool of the cover as I laid my cheek on it, my tears slick across the glossy jacket. And then I dozed off, resting with the story that I had just soaked up. A couple of years later came Wheezy in Jacob Have I Loved. Rass Island might have been isolating and claustrophobic for Wheezy, but it was horizon broadening for me. I could see the whole place. I could smell her clothes after a day of crabbing, feel the hot shame of her face flush near the captain, hear her sister's irritating perfectness. I truly understood how conflicted Wheezy felt about so many things. And it wasn't just Wheezy I could empathize with. All of the characters, no matter how minor a role intended to play, were vibrant, fully realized. I didn't think about how she, Katherine Paterson, the writer, achieved these things. That didn't matter to me back then. It was the characters who mattered. Now, as a writer, it is still those characters who matter to me. When I reread her books, which I do pretty often, they are as real to me now as they were then. But now I have an additional and gigantic admiration for the skill and talent leaping out from all those pages. Katherine is a master writer. I won't bore you with the jargon of craft, with the many, many elements of character development and plotting, et cetera, that she excels at. But I will tell you a couple of things that I love about her work. She is brilliant at planting seeds, many seeds, seeds of memory, of childhood, of origin, of backstory, never forgetting to tend and sow them throughout a narrative. Even when you think you might have caught one that maybe won't be threaded back around, that maybe had as its only job to resonate once, a father singing to an oyster bed, perhaps. There it comes back again at you, right at the moment you have been primed by her skillful hand to receive it, letting its deeper meaning unfold and carry you away. And I love how she can surprise you, even when you think you know how a story is wrapping up and you know what loose threads need to be tied. Like Wheezy's mother in Jacob Have I Loved. Almost right up until the end, we see a mother through Wheezy's eyes, who is a steadfast presence for her family and content with that role in life. And then, bam, we get a glimpse of a woman who sees herself as a pioneering person who then chose, in keeping with the very foundation of feminism, to live her life as a wife and mother. And the timing of this revelation is just perfect as Wheezy, whose real name is Sarah Louise, matures into a young woman, able to grasp this more nuanced idea of who the people in her world really are. Brilliant. I have returned to Katherine's books again and again over the years. No matter my age or stage in life, I find new things that resonate. This is what is meant when a book is called timeless. And she achieves this over and over. She is wise in ways that are comforting to us. She has empathy and compassion. She can walk in a multitude of shoes. And this all comes through in her work. As a young reader, Katherine Paterson was the name on the covers of some of my favorite books. By the time I was a budding author, now nearly 20 years ago, she was, frankly, something of a goddess. Someone who was living a life that was a distant dream at best, and at worst, an unattainable ideal. I first met Katherine and John and Grace Green and Dan at one of their annual summer picnics for the Vermont children's writer and illustrator community. Katherine was sitting on a lawn chair under a tree when I arrived, chatting with Jim Arnosky. No paparazzi anywhere that I could see. Surreal. How could I be casually walking across the grass, about to offer a bowl of potato salad to the woman who gave me Jess and Leslie and the Great Gilly Hopkins? Truth be told, I was a bit short of breath. I don't know if you remember that or not. I had a book in my hand. I kind of was too afraid to ask her to sign. But there was no room for that nonsense with Katherine. She was just so matter-of-fact about the whole thing, waving hello and motioning me over to the picnic table to put my bowl down. I was just simply one of the gang, no big deal, and her nonchalance set me right at ease. I don't know what I was imagining that first afternoon to be like, looking back. I mean, it was a backyard picnic, not an American Library Association banquet. Potluck and camaraderie was what we found in those summer gatherings. And I felt so welcomed into the fold by Katherine, really our resident godmother of children's literature, that for several years, every time a new writer moved to Vermont, I would send Grace his or her information so that they could have the good fortune of being invited to the Patterson Green picnic too. Grace said she was going to start calling me Julie McCoy then, the enthusiastic greeter on the TV show The Love Boat. And if you know Grace, you can hear her saying that. She did call me Julie for a while. I was asked to be here this evening to pay tribute to Katherine, and I couldn't be more honored to have this opportunity to thank her. I've shared my personal reasons for being here, but of course, Katherine's work speaks for itself. She lives up to her reputation in spades as an award-winning, beloved children's book author, as if 2 Newbery Awards for Bridge and Jacob, it's true, look it up, and 2 National Book Awards for Gilly and the Master Puppeteer weren't enough stateside. She's also one of only 3 people internationally to win both the Hans Christian Andersen Award and the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award. And there's more. She's going to tell me to shut up and sit down soon, though. In 2010, she became our 2nd National Ambassador for Children's Literature, appointed by none other than President Obama. And in 2013, received the Laura Ingalls Wilder Award for Lifetime Achievement in Children's Literature. But I suspect this impressive list of awards is not the predominant reason why this 10th anniversary book festival is dedicated to you. I suspect it is also because Katherine, quite simply, is a gift to our state of Vermont. In our incredibly rich community of artists and thinkers and readers and writers, Katherine is not only a stellar storyteller, she is an embracer of her community, and her community embraces her in return. Thank you.
Come on up. Thank you, Tanya. And now to officially accept the honor, a woman officially designated as a living legend by the of the United States. It's true, look that up too. Katherine Paterson.
Well, if I had any sense, I'd go home while I was ahead. Tanya, that was remarkable.
Are you going straight to reading? Can I just say
Yeah, you're going
a
to say
quick
something.
thing about
if it's quick.
Yeah, it'll be really quick. Because, Rick asked me to say this. So, and one thing that is true, of course, we don't let living legends get off easy. Some people might be able to walk away with this award and sit down and just have a nice evening. But of course, we aren't going to let Katherine get away with that. But what's really exciting is she's going to read a bit from her new autobiography, Stories of My Life, and what a life. And we are also thrilled to say that the festival is going to be able to sell this book a month in advance. I hope that, okay, good. Only tonight. So the bookstore is very excited about this, but they're going to have to tuck them away. So if you want a book a good month in advance, tonight is the only night that the publisher is going to allow that. So not only are we going to hear a little bit world premiere from the new book, you also have the opportunity to get it signed and buy it, but tonight only. Thank you, Katherine.
Oh,
there you go.
Wow, I was about to interrupt the commercial. I have a lot of thank yous to say, and thank you, Rick, for offering me this wonderful honor, and for all the folks who've made this festival possible, because I love book festivals. I really do. I think that we're going to keep books alive by having these wonderful festivals. And I have to thank Senator Leahy for coming, and for the Senate that we don't have a lot of respect for right now, for finally voting once in a while. But I have to say that Senator Leahy is the reason I'm never going to vote for term limits. I'm very pleased to be here tonight, and I would like to introduce you to my daughter Mary, who is holding my books in my bag and everything for me, because she's sort of responsible for what I'm doing tonight, in that when I first began to win awards and go around and speak and play famous, I was a little worried what was going to happen to me, and I thought, well, if I keep one child in the audience every time I go out to speak, it'll make me stay honest. So my children got to go to these wonderful places and stay in these wonderful hotels, and Mary was the youngest, so the rest of them got to the point where it was a little hard for them to leave school and go off with Mother. And so I invited Mary to some wonderful occasion, and she said, "Oh, Mom, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I'm just not in the mood for another one of your 5-hour speeches." So tonight I'm skipping the 5-hour speech and going directly to the book that Fran has so nicely advertised for you, which I'm a little embarrassed about, because I always swore I'd never write a memoir. And so I keep protesting that it's not a memoir, and they say, "Well, what is it?" And I said, "Well, it's Stories of My Life." And they said, "Well, what's the title?" And I said, "Stories of My Life," which seems like such a dumb title. And I actually proposed several titles that I thought were much nicer, and the publisher turned them all down, so it's still Stories of My Life. But I thought I'd read you 2 stories, one from when I was young and one from after I'd become an actual writer. And the first one, my life is a rather, I had a card in my desk drawer for a long time. It had 3 panels, and the top panel was a big whale, and words are coming out of the whale's mouth, and it says, "Incredible as it seems," and then there's a man popping out of the whale's mouth, and he says, "My life is based on a true story." And as incredible as it seems, my life is indeed based on a true story. But I'm starting with the second time we were evacuated from China to the United States. I was glad to be in a country where occupying soldiers didn't run across our front yard or question my parents, where no bombs were falling and our father would come home safely every night. The few months we spent in Lynchburg, where we once again landed on our camel relatives until we found a tiny apartment nearby, were happy ones for me. This time at Garland Road School, the first time at Garland Road School was the day I didn't get any Valentines. I had a wonderful third grade teacher and a second cousin in my class who was a real friend. After playing a bareback rider and a firefly in Shanghai American School productions, I was ready for the big time. So I was thrilled when the teacher cast me as the wicked fairy in the third grade production of Sleeping Beauty. I overheard her after my exuberant performance telling my mother, "Katherine really raised the roof." I half knew it was a compliment, but it was also a bit of a London Bridge moment when I had to worry about the structural integrity of the auditorium. The next fall, we moved to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I was enrolled in the fourth grade at the Calvin H. Wiley Elementary School, leaving behind my kind teacher and cousin. The fourth grade was a time of fear and humiliation for me. Nothing I had learned in my previous school seemed to matter in this one. The locker method of handwriting that I finally caught on to in Lynchburg was invalid in Winston-Salem, where the Palmer method was the only proper system. Spelling words using the wrong kind of cursive letter were defaced with large red X's, even when spelled correctly. On those occasions when I was given lunch money, it was always 15 cents, which I'm sure was all my parents could spare. I remember vividly a lecture by the teacher on a lunchroom duty about my failure to, about my failure to buy a balanced meal. 15 cents didn't buy balanced meals in the cafeteria, but it would buy my favorite lunch, which consisted of a bottle of chocolate milk, a small dish of black-eyed peas, and a box of chocolate-covered raisins. I suppose I could have skipped the raisinets and bought another vegetable, but what 9-year-old would want to do that? And worst of all, there was Pansy, the 7th grade bully, who along with her 2 large friends terrorized me on the playground. Since there were no girlfriends to hang out with during recess, I would stand trembling as close to the school building as I could, watching Pansy and her friends coming toward me from the bottom of the large playground. "I'm going to report you," she said to me one day. "You're walking on the grass." I looked down at the hard, bare ground under my feet. "There's no grass here," I protested. "Of course not," she said, "because people like you keep walking on it." Being reported was like being indicted for a felony. I lived in dread for days. I couldn't tell my parents. They'd gone to my Aunt Catherine's funeral in Lexington, and even after they returned, I couldn't tell them. The disgrace would have been too much for them to bear. Every recess, Pansy would tell me that at any moment now, I would be called to the principal's office. One day I was so frightened that I broke into tears in music class. Mrs. Obershane, the beautiful music teacher, quietly took me out into the hall and gently asked me what was the matter. I blurted out my crime and Pansy's threat. She didn't laugh. She didn't even smile. She simply assured me that I would not be expelled for walking on the imaginary grass. Indeed, she was quite sure I wouldn't even be reprimanded. I should just go to the girls' room and wash my face and come to class when I felt ready. If only my classroom teacher had been so warm and understanding. I recognize now that some of my best writing had its seeds in that awful year, but I can't remember once saying to my 9-year-old self, "Buck up, old girl. Someday you're going to make a mint out of all this misery." There were, however, A few people that I remember with great fondness from that horrible year. One of course, was Mrs. Oberstein, who not only taught me how to do-re-mi, but also showed me that there were adults who could deeply empathize with the child's irrational fears. Another was the librarian of the Calvin H. Wiley School, who made the library a sanctuary and a place of comfort and delight in an otherwise frightening school. And there was Eugene Hammett, the other weird kid in the 4th grade. I've told the story of Eugene so many times, I'm sure there are people that could lip sync it, but I can't resist telling it again here. I used to ask an audience to raise their hands if they had not yet heard the story of Eugene Hammett, because I swore I would tell it as long as a single hand went up. Though Eugene and I became friends sometime in the course of the year, there was an important difference between us. I was weird through no choice of my own. I spoke English, as my friends in Shanghai had, with something of a British accent. I could, as I noted, hardly afford lunch, much less clothes, so my classmates would from time to time recognize on my back one of their donations to charity. On December 7th, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and because it was known that I'd come from that part of the world, there were dark hints that I might be one of them. Eugene, on the other hand, was weird by choice, or mostly by choice. I guess he didn't choose his looks. He was a perfectly round little boy who wore full-moon steel-rimmed glasses long before John Lennon made them acceptable, and sported a half-inch blonde brush cut. My only ambition in the 4th grade was to become somehow less weird. Eugene's declared ambition was to become a ballet dancer. In North Carolina in 1941, little boys, even well-built or skinny little boys, did not want to be ballet dancers when they grew up. Now, sometimes outcasts despise even each other, but Eugene and I did not. We were friends for the rest of the 4th grade and all of the 5th, 6th, and 7th grades. During my public school career, Calvin H. Wiley was the only school I went to for much more than a year. And by the time Eugene and I were in the 7th grade, I had fulfilled my modest ambition. Eugene, on the other hand, continued to march, or should I say dance, to a different drummer. We moved the summer after the 7th grade. I grew up at last and had a full, rich life in which people loved me and didn't call me names, at least not to my face. But from time to time over the years, I would think of Eugene and worry about him. Whatever could have happened to my chubby little friend whose consuming passion was to become a ballet dancer? After many decades and scene changes, the Paterson family was living in Norfolk, Virginia, and our son David had become, at 17, a serious actor. But in order to get the parts he wanted, he realized that he needed to take dancing lessons. There was, however, a problem. Even in 1983, boys in Norfolk, Virginia did not generally aspire to become ballet dancers. He asked me to find out about lessons he could take without the rest of the soccer team knowing about it. My friend Catherine Morton's daughter took ballet, so I said to Catherine, David needs to take ballet lessons, but he's not eager for all his buddies to know about it. Do you have any recommendations? Well, said Catherine, if he's really serious, Gene Hammett at Tidewater Ballet is the best teacher anywhere around. Of course, you may find him a bit strange, but whoa, wait a minute, I said. Gene who? Hammett, she replied. He sends dancers to the Joffrey and New York City Ballet and Alvin Ailey every year. He's especially good with young black dancers, terribly hard on any kid that he thinks has talent, but he'd give his life for them. Gene who? I asked again. Hammett, she said. You may have seen him around town. He's enormous and wears great flowing caftans. He does look a bit weird, but he's a wonderful teacher. You don't happen to know where he came from? Why? Well, he came here from New York. New York? He wasn't a dancer. Oh, yes, he was quite good in his time. You wouldn't know it now by looking at him, but he was a fine dancer 20, 30 years ago. You wouldn't happen to know where he grew up. Oh, I don't know, she said, North Carolina somewhere, I think. Next time you see him, would you ask him if he remembers anyone named Catherine Wommeldorf from Calvin H. Wiley School? Some days later, the phone rang. "Catherine," said an unknown male voice, "this is Jean Hammett." "Eugene, do you remember me?" "I even remember a joke you told me in the 4th grade. I asked you why, if you were born in China, you weren't Chinese. And you said, if a cat's born in a garage, does it make it an automobile?" "And what about you? You danced in New York, and now you're a famous teacher of ballet? It's hard to imagine. You were a little round boy when I knew you." He laughed. "Well," he said, "I'm a big round man." I saw Eugene a number of times after that, and he was a big round man. But I also saw pictures of him leaping like Baryshnikov from the boards of a New York stage. And even if I miss knowing him when he was slim and gorgeous and at the height of his career, I wouldn't give anything for knowing that it happened as he had determined it would back then when we were both weird little 9-year-olds at Calvin H. Wiley School. I tried a couple of times to put Eugene into a novel, but I've found that you can't put real people into books. Characters in books have to be believable, and real people, especially people like Eugene, are simply not believable. I did try to put Pansy, the 7th grade bully, into Bridge to Terabithia. It was going to be the perfect revenge for all those terrifying recess hours she caused me. But there again, I don't know why Pansy was a bully. I know that people aren't born bullies and that no one is a bully or a snob who is comfortable with himself or herself. But I had to know why Janice Avery was a bully. And when I knew, I felt sorry for her. Before I finished the book, I rather liked her. It ruined my plan for revenge. Well, I'm going to grow up and be a writer, so this is the next session. And this is a question that I often get asked in school, so I thought I would share it with you. And I hope it doesn't come into the brag category, since I never brag. You heard him, you look it up. How does it feel to be famous? The questioner is young and earnest and has just confided that although she doesn't know what she wants to be, she knows that she wants to be famous. I don't really know how to answer her question. How does it feel to be famous? And then I remember things that happened after Bridge to Terabithia won the Newbery Medal. I would be invited somewhere to speak, and there would be a lovely dinner at which I was the honored guest. The people on either side at the table would say something gracious and congratulatory, and then they would turn to the person at the other side and never speak to me again for the whole meal. There were a few times when the person in charge made it clear that she'd hired me for the weekend and expected to get her money's worth, by gum. I'd come home and whine to my long-suffering husband. "I'm a human being," I'd say. "Why can't they just treat me like a human being?" And then I remembered Anita. When I was in Chandler Junior High School in Richmond, Virginia, all of us new kids were put in the same homeroom. It was a wonderful thing because we could make friends with each other. We didn't have to try to cope with the already cemented cliques that populated the rest of the school. I made several good friends that year, but there was one new girl that we were all shy around. The reason we were shy around Anita was because she was famous. She was the youngest member of the Carter sisters. Her mother, Maybelle, had been part of the legendary country music group, the Carter Family. Her older sister, June, went on to marry Johnny Cash. And at the time, her mother, 2 older sisters, and Anita sang regularly on the radio and in concerts all over the South. We didn't make friends with her because we didn't know what to say to someone we considered famous. Because she had moved around the country a lot, Anita needed catching up on a couple of subjects, and for some reason, I was asked to tutor her. To my amazement, she was so shy that even one-on-one, she barely spoke above a whisper. Yet that summer, I went to a concert at the stadium, and on stage, Anita was transformed. The huge crowd loved her, and she obviously loved performing for them. If it is hard for me at 45 to deal with the little bit of fame that I have, how must it have been for Anita, I wondered. So I wrote Come Sing Jimmy Joe about James, a shy boy who becomes a star. If you want to know what Katherine Paterson is really like, you should read that book. Like James and perhaps Anita, I'm a shy show-off, a very private person who loves to perform. When my friend Nancy Graff read this section on feeling famous, she said, "Oh, come on, Katherine, you know you get a kick out of being famous." We both laughed. I mean, I was thrilled to be introduced to the Empress of Japan and hear her say, "Katherine Paterson, who wrote Bridge to Terabithia?" Sometimes I can't believe my own life. I find myself standing on a stage or sitting at a table with writers I've known and admired for many years, really famous people, and think, this is me here with these amazing people. But that doesn't mean I feel famous. Famous is not an emotion like love or hate or jealousy or fear, feelings which I'm well acquainted with. You can't feel it, but you can learn over the years to sit back and enjoy the perks. When the Master Puppeteer won the National Book Award in 1977, all my friends in Washington area rejoiced with me. The following year, Bridge to Terabithia won the Newbery Medal, and they threw another big party. Fortunately, I moved in 1979, and they didn't have to give me yet another party when the Great Gilly Hopkins won the National Book Award and was the Newbery Honor Book. By this time, I was afraid I wouldn't have a single writer friend left. I was the biblical Job in reverse. Why me, God? Why me? My special friend in Tacoma Park, Maryland, was Jean Nemovich. Jean was an established writer when I first met her, but not long after we became friends, my second novel was published, then the next 4 that all won national prizes. Jean stood by me in my triumphs as she would through my troubles, and always with a wonderful sense of humor. Soon after the first Newbery, I was scheduled to give a speech that I knew had to be a good one, since it seemed to me that almost every important children's writer and critic on both sides of the Atlantic was going to be in the audience. We were on vacation at Lake George, so I sent the speech to Jean for her comments and revised accordingly, but I was still anxious. I called her and told her she'd just have to pray for me, as I was afraid I was going to fall apart. Jean, a devout Roman Catholic, promised she'd pray, but told me to calm down, it would be fine. And it was. I called her to tell her it had gone all right and thanked her for her prayers. If I'd known how efficacious Roman Catholic prayers were, I said jokingly, I might have converted long ago. Well, I did pray, she said. And he said, "Katherine, who?" When I moved to Vermont, Jean got in touch with Grace Green, a friend I had made soon after moving, and told her that as long as I was in Maryland and even in Virginia, she'd been able to keep me humble. Vermont was just too far away, so she was turning the job over to Grace. I wondered if Grace had taken her assignment too much to heart when she told me this story. A small group of us gather periodically to do pastel painting, and the night of January the 5th, 2010, I was missing. Grace had gotten an invitation, so she knew that I was in Washington being presented as the new National Ambassador for Young People's Literature. But when Janine and Leslie asked where I was, Grace said, "She's in Washington being made a national embarrassment." When she realized what she'd said, she tried to correct herself. "Oh, no, I mean natural embarrassment." Jean would have loved that very Freudian slip. Since real friends like mine are more precious than awards, I know I'm truly blessed. And gratitude, unlike fame, is something one can actually feel. And I'm very grateful for all of you.